The snow fell heavy over Moscow in February 2005, muffling the sound of gunfire that echoed through the abandoned warehouse district. Victor Hayes pressed his back against the frozen concrete wall, his breath coming in ragged clouds. Blood seeped through his tactical vest, warm against the bitter cold. He had been a ghost for 15 years, moving through the shadows of the Cold War's dying embers. And tonight, that ghost was about to disappear forever. "Victor, we need to move now," the voice crackled through his earpiece. Garrett Thornton, his partner, his brother in all but blood. But Victor Hayes wasn't moving anywhere, not anymore. He looked down at the flash drive clutched in his frozen fingers, the small device that contained proof of a conspiracy so deep it reached into the heart of American power. Operation Nightfall. The very program they had sworn to protect had become the instrument of their betrayal. Admiral Richard Blackwood stepped out from behind a shipping container, his service weapon pointed steady at Victor's chest. 20 years they had served together, 20 years of trust, of brotherhood, of missions that never made it into any official record. All of it, a lie. "I'm sorry, Victor," Blackwood said, and his voice carried no emotion at all. "But you always were too principled for this line of work." The shot that killed Victor Hayes was clean, professional, the kind of kill shot they had all been trained to deliver. He died thinking of his daughter, 8 years old, safe in a small apartment in Chicago, waiting for a father who would never come home. Garrett Thornton watched from the rooftop 3 buildings away, his sniper scope trained on Blackwood's head, his finger frozen on the trigger. He could make the shot, should make the shot, but Victor's 8-year-old daughter was in a safe house 2 miles from his position, and Blackwood had 4 other operators scattered throughout the district. If Thornton took the shot, the girl would be dead within the hour. So Garrett Thornton let his brother die, made a choice that would haunt him for 19 years, and disappeared into the Moscow night with a little girl named Sienna, who didn't yet understand that her entire world had just been destroyed. 19 years later, the Chicago warehouse district looked almost exactly the same as it had on the night Garrett Thornton had chosen this location for his dead drop. February air, cold enough to numb exposed skin, dark enough to hide sins. He was 62 now, his hair gone silver, his hands not quite as steady as they used to be. But the instincts remained sharp, honed by decades of living in the spaces between official record and operational reality. The package was supposed to be routine. Intelligence materials, encrypted drives, the kind of black market information trading that kept former operators like him connected to the world they had left behind. Thornton approached the designated container slowly, his hand resting on the concealed Sig Sauer beneath his heavy coat. The weight of the weapon was familiar, comforting in the way old habits become. He was reaching for the lockbox when the voice came from the shadows. Only Black Ops personnel knew that signal. Thornton's weapon was drawn and aimed before the sentence finished, his body moving on muscle memory that transcended conscious thought. The figure stepped forward just enough for the distant streetlight to catch the edge of her face. Young, maybe mid-20s, wearing tactical pants and a dark jacket that suggested either military training or very good research. Her hands were visible, empty, held at shoulder height in a gesture that was careful but not quite surrender. "I don't know who you are, lady," Thornton said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in military intelligence. "But you're about 3 seconds from making a very bad decision." The woman tilted her head slightly, and something about the gesture sent ice water through Thornton's veins. He knew that movement, had seen it 1,000 times in someone else, someone who had been dead for 19 years. "The signal you received last week," she continued, her voice steady despite the weapon aimed at her center mass. "The dead drop protocol. The emergency frequency combination. That's classified information, Colonel Thornton. Only 50 people in the world know those codes, and most of them are supposed to be dead." Thornton's finger rested against the trigger guard, his mind racing through possibilities. CIA? NSA? Or worse, had the enemy somehow obtained their most guarded secrets? The protocols she was describing were part of Operation Nightfall, a program so black it didn't officially exist. He had helped develop those very signals during his time at Fort Bragg, back when the world seemed simpler and enemies wore uniforms you could recognize. "I'm waiting for an explanation," Thornton pressed, taking a step closer. The warehouse around them was a maze of shipping containers and shadows, offering multiple sight lines and exit routes. He had chosen this location specifically for its tactical advantages. Now he wondered if he had walked into a trap. The woman remained perfectly still, her green eyes studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She seemed to be weighing options, deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she reached slowly into her jacket pocket, moving with deliberate care to avoid startling him. "You developed those signals in 2005, she said quietly, pulling out what looked like an ordinary cell phone. "You were part of Operation Nightfall under Admiral Richard Blackwood. The project was supposed to be shut down after the Moscow incident." The Moscow incident. The words hit Garrett Thornton like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. That nightmare operation haunted his dreams, the mission where everything had gone catastrophically wrong, where his brother had died and a little girl had lost her father. Only 12 people knew the full details of what had happened in that frozen wasteland, and half of them were dead. "Who are you?" he whispered, his weapon still trained on her, but his certainty beginning to crack. Instead of answering directly, she activated the device in her hand. A series of lights blinked in a pattern that Thornton recognized immediately. His blood went cold. It was the counter signal, the response code that was supposed to be used only in the most extreme circumstances. The pattern was flawless, executed with a precision that spoke of extensive training. But this was impossible. The counter signal had been classified at a level so high that Thornton himself had never been cleared to know it fully. He knew his piece of the puzzle, but the complete sequence required authorization from at least 3 different agencies. Seeing it now, executed perfectly by a stranger in a Chicago warehouse, shattered everything he thought he knew about operational security. The woman watched recognition dawn on his face. She lowered her hand slowly, and when she stepped fully into the light, Garrett Thornton felt the world tilt on its axis. The eyes, dear God, the eyes were exactly the same. "My name is Lieutenant Sienna Hayes," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the surname. "And I need you to tell me the truth about how my father died." The weapon slipped in Thornton's grip. Sienna, the 8-year-old girl he had carried out of Moscow 19 years ago, the child he had raised in secret, teaching her to survive in a world that had tried to kill her before she was old enough to understand why. The girl who had called him Uncle Garrett until she was 16 and figured out that their relationship was built on lies and necessity and a promise he had made to a dying man. "Sienna," he managed, his voice rough. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "You taught me to find anyone," she replied, and there was steel in her voice now, the kind of hardness that came from years of training and loss. "You taught me tradecraft, operational security, how to move through shadows. You taught me everything except the truth." Before Thornton could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles shattered the night. Multiple engines, moving fast and with purpose. His tactical instincts screamed danger, and he grabbed Sienna's arm. "We need to move, now." But Sienna didn't budge. "They've been following you for months, Garrett. Ever since you started asking questions about the other members of your old team. Did you really think those accidents were coincidental?" The words hit harder than the sound of car doors slamming in the distance. Over the past year, 3 of his former Nightfall colleagues had died in what appeared to be unrelated incidents. A car accident in Virginia, a hiking mishap in Colorado, a house fire in Oregon. He had attended all 3 funerals, feeling the weight of survivor's guilt, but never suspecting murder. "They're cleaning house," Sienna continued, her voice urgent now. "Everyone who was in Moscow, everyone who might know what really happened to my father. You're on the list, Garrett. We both are." The first tactical light swept across the warehouse entrance, followed by the coordinated footsteps of a professional team. Thornton could hear at least 6 different operators, spread in a pattern that suggested military training. These weren't random thugs or local law enforcement. Someone had sent a team, and they knew exactly what they were doing. "How many?" Thornton asked, his training overriding his confusion. 8, plus a command vehicle 2 blocks out. They've got thermal imaging and radio coordination. Standard kill team configuration. Sienna was already moving deeper into the maze of containers, and Thornton found himself following on instinct. "Who trained you?" he demanded, keeping his voice low. "You did. Then the Marines. Then I got myself into Ranger School, though they weren't particularly happy about that. Turns out, being a woman in special operations training means you have to be twice as good just to be considered half as capable." She glanced back at him, and in the dim light, he could see the combat readiness in her posture, the economy of movement that spoke of countless hours of training. "You left me with a trust fund when you disappeared 5 years ago. I used it to become someone who could find the truth." They crouched behind a rusted container marked with Chinese shipping labels as the tactical team spread through the warehouse. Thornton could hear their radio chatter, professional and cold. "Target confirmed in Sector 3. Morrison Protocol authorized. No witnesses, no evidence." Morrison Protocol, the assassination guideline they had developed for nightfall operations. Hearing it used against him felt like cosmic irony. Sienna was already pulling out her phone, removing the battery with practiced efficiency. "They've been tracking you through every digital footprint. I've been running dark for 6 months, which is how I stayed alive long enough to find you." "The others who died," Thornton said, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. "Miller, Jackson, Rodriguez. You're saying they were assassinated?" "Miller's brake line was cut. Jackson's climbing gear was sabotaged. Rodriguez's house had an accelerant pattern consistent with professional arson." Sienna's voice was matter-of-fact, but Thornton could hear the anger beneath it. "Someone is systematically eliminating everyone who was part of Operation Nightfall, and the only reason you're still alive is because you went off the grid." A shadow moved past their hiding spot, close enough that Thornton could hear the operator's breathing. He pressed himself against the cold metal, his weapon ready, but Sienna was already moving. She flowed around the container like water, silent and precise. And by the time the operator realized someone was behind him, it was too late. The takedown was textbook perfect. Sienna's arm wrapped around his throat in a blood choke, her other hand securing his weapon arm. And within 8 seconds, the operator was unconscious on the ground. She lowered him silently, stripped his radio and weapon, and moved on without a word. Garrett Thornton stared at the unconscious man, then at the young woman who had just executed a maneuver that would have earned praise in any Tier 1 unit. This wasn't the 8-year-old girl he had rescued from Moscow. This was a fully trained operator, moving with the kind of confidence that came from real experience. "How many ops have you run?" he asked as they continued through the warehouse. "Enough," she replied. 3 deployments in the Middle East, though officially I was just a communications specialist. Turns out being underestimated is a tactical advantage. Men tend to overlook the woman at the radio until she's putting rounds downrange at 800 meters. They reached a section of the warehouse that seemed like a dead end. But Sienna moved to a specific point on the wall and pressed something. A section of metal swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. "Emergency exit," she explained. "I've been preparing for this meeting for 3 months, Garrett. I knew you'd come here eventually. I knew they'd follow. And I knew we'd need a way out." The passage led to an alley behind the warehouse, where a black motorcycle waited under a dim streetlight. Sienna tossed him a helmet. "You drive?" she asked. "It's been a while." "Then hold on tight." The motorcycle roared to life as shouts erupted from inside the warehouse. Their pursuers had found the unconscious operator and the hidden exit. Within seconds, they would be in the alley, and the chase would begin in earnest. Sienna drove like someone who had spent years mastering the skill, weaving through traffic with a precision that bordered on reckless. Thornton could see at least two vehicles in pursuit, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. Suppressed gunfire cracked behind them, sparks flying from the pavement near their rear wheel. "The safe house better have answers," Thornton shouted over the engine noise, his arms wrapped around Sienna's waist as she took a sharp turn that made the bike lean at a dangerous angle. "It has 19 years of answers," she called back. "Every question you never asked. Every truth they buried with my father." They raced through the empty streets of industrial Chicago, death following close behind. Thornton realized that his quiet retirement from the intelligence world had been a fantasy. Whatever Sienna was about to show him, whatever truth she was carrying, it was going to change everything he believed about duty, honor, and the country he had sworn to serve. The safe house was a small apartment building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Sienna parked the motorcycle in an underground garage and led him up 3 flights of stairs, checking each landing carefully before proceeding. Her movements were economical, professional, the kind of tactical awareness that couldn't be faked. Inside the apartment, Thornton stopped dead. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and connecting lines that looked like the work of either a genius or a madman. But Garrett Thornton recognized enough faces and places to know that this wasn't paranoid fantasy. This was careful, methodical intelligence work, the kind of investigation that took years and resources and an obsessive attention to detail. "Welcome to the real Operation Nightfall," Sienna said, turning on a lamp that cast long shadows across the room. "The one my father died trying to expose." Thornton moved closer to the wall, his heart pounding. Photos of high-ranking government officials, defense contractors, and what appeared to be foreign agents were connected by red string in an intricate web of conspiracy. But what made his blood run cold were the photographs of his dead teammates, each marked with dates and locations of their supposed accidents. Miller, Jackson, Rodriguez, all dead within the past year. And in the center of the web, a photograph of Admiral Richard Blackwood, marked with a single word in red ink: Prometheus. "This is insane," Thornton whispered, moving closer to examine a surveillance photo that showed him leaving his apartment just 2 days ago. "How long have you been watching me?" Sienna poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine that looked like it had been running constantly for weeks. 6 months. Ever since you started your own investigation into Miller's death. I needed to know if you were one of them or one of us. The coffee was bitter and strong, exactly what Thornton needed to stay alert. Outside the apartment, he could hear police sirens in the distance, probably responding to reports of gunfire near the warehouse. Their pursuers wouldn't give up easily, but Sienna seemed confident in their temporary safety. "Start from the beginning," Thornton said, settling into a chair that faced the evidence wall. "Tell me what really happened in Moscow." Sienna pulled down a photograph of Victor Hayes, Thornton's brother in all but blood. Written across the image in red ink were the words, "Murdered by Blackwood. Operation Nightfall compromised." "My father wasn't killed by Russian intelligence," Sienna began, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "He was assassinated by Admiral Blackwood because he discovered something that threatened everything. A shadow organization within our own government. People in positions of power who were selling state secrets, manipulating military operations, and eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth." She moved to a different section of the wall where financial documents were pinned next to photos of American military installations. Thornton studied the documents, recognizing some of the names and bank account numbers. The amounts of money involved were staggering, enough to fund small wars or topple governments. "These are all American officials," he said, feeling sick. "Pentagon, CIA, NSA, some of these people I've worked with." "The highest levels," Sienna confirmed. "They call themselves the Prometheus Group, and they've been operating for over a decade. My father spent 2 years gathering evidence, building a case that would expose the entire network. He was supposed to extract from Moscow with everything he needed to bring them down. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made Thornton question everything he had believed about his service. So the Moscow mission was designed to fail, to eliminate your father and our team. Exactly. But my father was smarter than they anticipated. He had backup plans, hidden evidence caches, and most importantly, he had help from within the intelligence community. Sienna pointed to a photo of herself, much younger, wearing a military uniform. He trained me from the time I was 5 years old, taught me codes, dead drops, operational security. He knew that if something happened to him, I would need to be able to survive. He never told me, Thornton said quietly. Never mentioned that he was training you. He couldn't. The less you knew, the safer you were. The safer I was. Sienna's voice cracked slightly. The night he died, he activated the emergency protocol, the nightfall signal. It was his way of telling me that everything had gone wrong, that I needed to disappear, that I needed to trust only one person. Who? You. He left instructions, buried in code that took me 3 years to fully decrypt. You were the failsafe, Garrett, the one person he trusted to keep me alive if the mission failed. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside made both of them freeze. Sienna immediately drew a pistol from a shoulder holster Thornton hadn't noticed, while he moved to the window to check the street below. 3 black SUVs were parked outside the building, and he could see figures in tactical gear taking positions around the exits. How did they find us so fast? Thornton demanded. Sienna was already moving, grabbing a backpack from a closet and stuffing it with documents and hard drives. They have resources we can't match. Facial recognition, cell tower triangulation, satellite surveillance. But they also have something to lose. The evidence my father died for is still out there, and they know it. The footsteps in the hallway were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of doors being kicked in. Their hunters were searching the building systematically, and it was only a matter of minutes before they reached the right floor. Fire escape, Sienna said, shouldering the backpack and moving toward the back window. Leads to the roof. From there we can reach the next building. Thornton nodded, but as they prepared to leave, he grabbed Sienna's arm. Before we run again, I need to know what's in those files that's worth all these lives. Sienna's expression was grim as she met his eyes. Proof that the Prometheus Group has been planning something much bigger than financial corruption. They're going to use classified military assets to stage false flag operations. 3 simultaneous attacks designed to look like foreign terrorism. Something that will give them the excuse to declare martial law and effectively seize control of the government. The door to their apartment exploded inward just as they reached the window. Thornton could hear combat boots on the hardwood floor, the sound of furniture being overturned in a systematic search. As they climbed out onto the fire escape, Sienna grabbed his hand. The operation is scheduled for this Saturday, she whispered urgently. 3 days from now, 3 cities, New York, Los Angeles, and Dallas. If we don't stop it, everything our fathers fought to protect will be destroyed from the inside. They climbed toward the roof as gunfire erupted below them, the night air filling with the sound of pursuit and the weight of impossible responsibility. Garrett Thornton looked at the young woman beside him. No longer the frightened 8-year-old he had carried out of Moscow, but a trained operator ready to fight for the truth her father had died protecting. The rooftop was slick with Chicago's evening drizzle, making every step treacherous as they ran across the gravel surface. Behind them, the sounds of their pursuers echoed up from the fire escape. Sienna led him to the edge of the building, where a narrow gap separated them from the next rooftop. It was maybe 8 feet across, but with a 5-story drop to the alley below. Without hesitation, she took a running leap and landed hard on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. Thornton followed, his heart pounding as he sailed through the night air. He hit the opposite roof with more force than he expected, pains shooting through his shoulder as he rolled. But there was no time to assess injuries. Already he could see tactical lights sweeping across the roof they had just abandoned. "This way," Sienna whispered, leading him to a rooftop access door that she opened with a key she produced from her jacket. "Bolt hole number 3. I have 7 locations scattered across the city. When you're fighting a shadow war against people with unlimited resources, You learn to be prepared. The stairwell inside was dark and narrow, smelling of mildew and years of neglect. They descended quickly, Sienna counting floors under her breath until they reached what appeared to be an abandoned office space on the 7th floor. Inside, the windows were covered with newspaper, and battery-powered lamps provided the only light. But what caught Thornton's attention was the sophisticated communications equipment humming quietly in the corner. Laptops, encrypted phones, and what looked like military-grade satellite uplink equipment. "How did you afford all this?" he asked. "The trust fund you left me was substantial. I invested wisely. And I may have redirected some Prometheus Group funds when I hacked their financial network last year." She activated one of the computer terminals, and the screen came to life with a map of the United States dotted with red markers. These are Prometheus Group assets, military bases where they have people in key positions, government facilities under their influence, private contractors working for them. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Thornton could see markers in Washington, D.C., Norfolk, San Diego, and dozens of other locations. This wasn't just isolated corruption. This was a coordinated effort to control America's military and intelligence apparatus from the inside. "The false flag operation," Thornton said, studying the pattern. "What exactly are they planning?" Sienna opened another file containing intercepted communications and satellite imagery. 3 simultaneous attacks on American targets designed to look like foreign terrorism. The evidence will point to a specific country, giving the president grounds to declare a national emergency and implement martial law. During that period, constitutional rights will be suspended, military authority will override civilian government, and guess who will be advising the president on security matters? She displayed a photo that made Thornton's stomach turn. Admiral Richard Blackwood, standing at attention in his dress uniform, looking every inch the decorated hero and patriot. "Blackwood has been planning this for years," Sienna continued, "building his network, placing his people in crucial positions, waiting for the right moment. The Moscow operation was just one of many preliminary moves. My father was getting too close to the full picture, so they eliminated him. Now they're doing the same to everyone else who might know the truth." Thornton felt the weight of 19 years pressing down on him. 19 years of believing that Victor's death had been a tragic mistake, a mission that went wrong. 19 years of guilt for not taking that shot, for not killing Blackwood when he had the chance. And all of it had been a carefully orchestrated deception. "There has to be someone we can trust," he said. "Someone with enough authority to stop this." "There is," Sienna replied, pulling up a personnel file. "General Patricia Aldridge, Pentagon. She served with my father before he went into Black Ops. She has the authority, and according to my research, she's been asking uncomfortable questions about Admiral Blackwood for the past 3 years." Thornton studied the file. He knew General Aldridge by reputation, a straight arrow who had earned her stars through competence rather than politics. If anyone in the system could be trusted, it was her. "It's a risk," he said. "If we're wrong about her, if she's part of Prometheus, we're walking into a trap. If we do nothing, thousands of people will die on Saturday, and the country will fall into the hands of traitors." Sienna met his eyes, and in that moment, Garrett Thornton saw Victor Hayes staring back at him through his daughter's face. "We're out of safe options. We have to take the chance." Outside, the sirens were getting closer. They had maybe an hour before this bolt hole was compromised, maybe less. Thornton made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. "Make the call," he said. "Set up a meeting with General Aldridge. But we do it in public, somewhere with witnesses, and we have multiple exit routes planned." Sienna nodded and began working on her encrypted phone. As she typed, Thornton moved back to the evidence wall, studying the photographs and documents with new understanding. Victor Hayes hadn't died for nothing. He had died fighting to protect something bigger than himself, bigger than any individual mission. And now his daughter was carrying on that fight, whether she was ready for it or not. "General Aldridge will meet us tomorrow night," Sienna announced. "Washington Monument, Midnight. She wants to see the evidence before she commits to anything. Smart, Thornton said. That gives us 24 hours to prepare and about 48 hours before Operation Liberty's End goes active. Not much time to stop a conspiracy that's been years in the making. Sienna stood and walked over to him, and for the first time since their reunion, she looked vulnerable, young, like the little girl he had raised for 7 years before he had to disappear for her safety. "I've been doing this alone for 6 months," she said quietly, "running, hiding, gathering evidence. I wasn't sure you'd believe me, wasn't sure you'd help." Thornton pulled her into a hug, feeling her relax slightly against him. "Your father was my brother. You're my daughter in every way that matters. I failed Victor in Moscow, but I won't fail you. We're going to stop this, Sienna, whatever it takes." They stood like that for a moment, two soldiers in a war that most people didn't know existed, finding strength in each other before the next battle began. Outside, the night continued its indifferent march toward morning, toward Saturday, toward the moment when everything would change. When they finally pulled apart, Sienna wiped her eyes quickly and returned to her tactical persona. "We should move to bolt hole number 4. This location is probably compromised now. I have a place in Baltimore, more secure, with better equipment." As they gathered their gear and prepared to disappear back into the shadows, Garrett Thornton looked one last time at Victor Hayes' photograph on the evidence wall. His brother had died believing that the truth would eventually come out, that someone would finish what he started. Now, 19 years later, that someone was his daughter, trained and hardened and ready to fight. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, the Prometheus group wouldn't be hunting a frightened little girl. They would be hunting a fully trained operator who knew all their secrets and had nothing left to lose. The night swallowed them as they left the safe house, two ghosts moving through a city that slept in ignorant peace. 3 days until Operation Liberty's End. 72 hours to stop a coup that would reshape America forever. The clock was ticking, and the real war was about to begin. The dawn broke cold over Baltimore as Sienna Hayes checked the perimeter cameras for the 4th time in an hour. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with 48 hours remaining until Operation Liberty's End would tear America apart from the inside. Across the room, Garrett Thornton sat at the communications console, reviewing satellite imagery of Washington, D.C., and planning their approach to the meeting with General Aldrich. The safe house in Baltimore was more sophisticated than the Chicago location. A converted industrial loft with reinforced doors, multiple escape routes, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a 6-block radius. Sienna had established it 8 months ago, back when she first discovered the full scope of the Prometheus conspiracy. "We should talk about what happens if this goes wrong," Thornton said without looking up from the screens. His voice carried the weight of decades in the field, the kind of tactical realism that kept operators alive. "If Aldrich is compromised, if this is a trap, we need contingencies." Sienna moved to the window, watching the street below through a gap in the blackout curtains. Early morning traffic was beginning to build, ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs, completely unaware that their country was 3 days from a transformation that would change everything. "If it's a trap, we abort and go to Plan B, which is, we don't have a Plan B. That's why this has to work." Thornton finally looked up, and Sienna saw concern etched deep in the lines of his face. He had aged in the 5 years since she had last seen him, the silver in his hair more pronounced, the weight of his choices visible in ways that went beyond the physical. "Sienna, I need you to understand something. The people we're fighting, they don't play by rules. They won't hesitate. They won't show mercy, and they're very good at what they do. I know they killed my father." She turned from the window, and her voice was steel. "They've been hunting me for 6 months. I've seen what they're capable of. But I also know what I'm capable of, and I learn from the best." A ghost of a smile crossed Thornton's weathered face. "Victor would be so damn proud of you. You know that, right? Everything you've become, everything you've accomplished. He saw it in you even when you were small. That determination, that refusal to accept injustice. The mention of her father brought memories flooding back. Victor Hayes reading her bedtime stories that were actually coded lessons in situational awareness, teaching her to shoot tin cans off fence posts when she was 6, showing her how to read people, to understand the spaces between what they said and what they meant. He had been preparing her for a war she didn't know existed, and she had been too young to understand until it was too late. "Tell me about him," Sienna said, settling into the chair across from Thornton. "Not the operator, not the legend. Tell me about the man. I was 8 when he died. I remember fragments, pieces, but you knew him as an adult, as a soldier, as a brother." Thornton leaned back, his eyes going distant with memory. "Victor was the best of us, not the most skilled, not the most decorated, but the best where it mattered. He had this moral compass that never wavered, even when the mission got dark, even when the choices were impossible. We'd be deep in operations where right and wrong got blurry, and Victor always found the line, always knew where it was." He paused, his voice roughening with emotion. "The night he died, I had a clear shot on Blackwood. Perfect angle, perfect conditions. I could have ended it right there. But Victor had left instructions. If the operation went bad, if he didn't make it out, my mission was to get you to safety. Not revenge, not justice, you. And I had to choose." Sienna had known the basics of that night, had pieced together the timeline from encrypted files and Thornton's occasional haunted looks when the anniversary came around. But hearing him say it out loud, admitting to the choice that had shaped both their lives, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "You made the right call," she said quietly. "He would have wanted that. He always said the mission parameters change when civilians are involved, especially children. Get them out first, everything else is secondary. Doesn't make it easier, doesn't make it right. I've had 19 years to second-guess that decision, and I still don't know if I did the right thing. But I know Victor would have made the same choice if our positions were reversed." Thornton met her eyes. "He loved you more than anything in this world, Sienna. More than the mission, more than his oath, more than his own life. And he trusted me to make sure you survived to become the woman you are now." The moment hung between them, heavy with years of unspoken words and shared loss. Then Sienna's phone buzzed with an encrypted message, and the spell broke. She checked the screen, her tactical mind snapping back into focus. "Aldridge confirmed for midnight. She's coming alone, no security detail. Says she wants to keep this off the record until she sees what we have." Sienna looked up from the phone. "That's either a very good sign or a very bad one." "It means she's smart," Thornton said. "If we're telling the truth, bringing a security detail puts more people at risk. If we're running a con, she doesn't want witnesses to her mistake. Either way, she's thinking tactically." They spent the next 6 hours preparing. Sienna walked Thornton through every piece of evidence she had compiled, every connection she had traced, every financial transaction and communication intercept that proved the Prometheus Group's existence. The sheer volume of material was staggering, representing thousands of hours of investigation and analysis. At 1900 hours, they began their journey to Washington, D.C. Sienna had mapped 3 different routes, each with multiple fallback positions and rally points if they got separated. They traveled in a nondescript sedan she had purchased with cash 6 months earlier, taking secondary roads and changing vehicles twice to break any potential surveillance. The drive gave them time to talk, really talk, in a way they hadn't been able to since Sienna was 13, and Thornton had to disappear for her protection. He told her about the years after Moscow, the constant vigilance, the way he had watched her from a distance as she grew up, how he had pulled strings to get her into the best schools, how he had nearly blown his cover when she joined the Marines and deployed to Afghanistan. "I tracked every mission you went on," he admitted, "called in favors with people I shouldn't have talked to, just to make sure you came home safe. When I heard about that firefight outside Kandahar, the one where your squad got ambushed and you held off hostiles for 40 minutes until air support arrived, I almost had a heart attack. Sienna remembered that night vividly, the terror and the training kicking in simultaneously, her hands steady on her rifle, even as explosions tore apart the compound around her. The medal citation said I showed exceptional courage under fire, but I was just doing what you taught me. Stay calm, control your breathing, make every shot count. You got 3 confirmed kills with a rifle that had a damaged scope in almost complete darkness. That's not training, Sienna. That's talent. That's genetics. That's Victor's blood running through your veins. They reached the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area at 22:30 hours, giving them 90 minutes to conduct reconnaissance and establish escape routes. The Washington Monument stood illuminated against the night sky, a beacon of American ideals that was about to become a meeting point for those trying to save those very ideals from corruption. Sienna parked 6 blocks away, and they approached on foot, moving through the tourist crowds that lingered even at this late hour. Thornton checked sight lines while Sienna monitored radio frequencies, searching for any indication of military or law enforcement activity that might signal a trap. At 23:55 hours, General Patricia Aldridge appeared at the base of the monument, exactly as promised. She was 55 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide her military bearing. She stood alone, hands visible, no obvious security presence. Sienna and Thornton approached from opposite angles, a tactical maneuver that gave them overlapping fields of fire if things went wrong. When they were within speaking distance, Aldridge turned to face them, and her expression was carefully neutral. "Lieutenant Hayes, I presume?" Her voice carried the authority of 3 decades of command. "And Colonel Thornton, you've both been very difficult to locate." "That was the intention, ma'am," Sienna replied, stopping 10 feet away and maintaining a position that allowed quick movement to cover. "Thank you for coming." Aldridge studied them both with the analytical gaze of someone trained to read people. "I'll be honest, Lieutenant. When I received your message, my first instinct was to alert security and have you both picked up. Claims of massive government conspiracy don't typically come from reliable sources." "But you came anyway," Thornton observed, "because your message included details about Victor Hayes that aren't in any official record. Details that only someone very close to him would know." Aldridge's expression softened slightly. "I served with Victor for 2 years before he went into black operations. He was one of the finest officers I've ever known. His death was a loss that our country still hasn't recovered from, though most people don't even know his name." Sienna felt emotion tighten her throat, but kept her voice steady. "He didn't die in the line of duty, General. He was murdered. And the man who killed him is planning to stage a coup in 3 days. Admiral Richard Blackwood." Aldridge said the name like a curse. "I've suspected him of various improprieties for 3 years now, but I've never had anything concrete. He's careful, well-connected, and smart enough to stay just on the right side of legal scrutiny." "That's because he's been doing this for over a decade," Sienna said, pulling out a tablet from her bag and activating the screen. "I have evidence. Financial records, communications intercepts, operational plans. Everything you need to know that what I'm telling you is the truth." Aldridge took the tablet and began scrolling through files, her expression growing darker with each page. The audio recordings of Blackwood discussing casualty estimates with cold calculation. The financial transactions showing millions in bribes and offshore accounts. The satellite imagery of secret meetings with foreign agents. And finally, the complete operational plan for Liberty's End. 3 simultaneous attacks designed to give the Prometheus group the excuse they needed to seize power. When she looked up, there was steel in the general's eyes. If this is authentic, if even half of this is verifiable, then we're looking at treason on a scale that hasn't been attempted since the Civil War. "It's all authentic," Thornton said. "I verified as much as I could independently. Victor died getting this information. Sienna has spent 6 months filling in the gaps. It's real, General, and it's happening this Saturday. Aldridge handed back the tablet and pulled out her own secure phone. I need to make some calls, quietly. If Blackwood gets wind that we know about Liberty's End, he'll either accelerate the timeline or switch to contingency plans that we can't predict. With respect, ma'am, Sienna said carefully, who are you going to call? According to our intelligence, the Prometheus Group has infiltrated multiple agencies. We can't know who's compromised. You're right to be cautious, but I've been building my own network of trusted officers precisely because I suspected something like this was happening. People who I know are clean, who share my commitment to the Constitution above all else. Aldridge's face hardened with determination. If Blackwood wants to tear this country apart, he's going to find out what it means to fight against people who actually believe in what they swore to defend. Over the next hour, standing in the shadow of the Washington Monument, they planned an operation that would either save the Republic or get them all killed trying. Aldridge made encrypted calls to 3 officers she trusted absolutely. Colonel Marcus Sullivan in New York, a decorated infantry commander with 2 decades of service. Captain Travis Wade in Los Angeles, a former Delta Force operator who had transitioned to training roles. And Captain Blake Donnelly in Dallas, a combat veteran who ran security operations for critical infrastructure. But when Aldridge tried to reach Wade, the call went to voicemail. She tried twice more with the same result, and Sienna saw concern flash across the general's face. Wade always answers his secure line, Aldridge said quietly. Always. That's not protocol for him. That's paranoia born from too many close calls. Could he be compromised? Thornton asked, his hand drifting toward his concealed weapon. Or already dead, Sienna added grimly. The Prometheus Group has been eliminating potential threats systematically. If Wade was on their radar, they might have moved against him when they realized we were making contact with command-level officers. Aldridge's jaw tightened. Then we adapt. Lieutenant Hayes, how would you feel about taking command of the Los Angeles operation? Sienna felt every eye turn to her. This was the moment she had been working toward for 6 months, but now that it was here, the weight of it pressed down like a physical force. I'm a lieutenant, ma'am. First lieutenant, and I've only been in for 5 years. Those are seasoned operators you're talking about putting under my command. You're also Victor Hayes' daughter, trained by one of the best black ops specialists in American history, and you've been running a solo intelligence operation against a target that has eluded our entire intelligence apparatus. Aldridge's voice was firm. I don't give a damn about your rank, Lieutenant. I care about competence, dedication, and the ability to make hard decisions under pressure. Do you have those qualities? Sienna thought about the 6 months she had spent in the shadows, always moving, always investigating, staying one step ahead of people who wanted her dead. She thought about the night in Kandahar when she had held her position against overwhelming odds because retreating meant her squad died. She thought about her father, who had faced impossible choices and never wavered from doing what was right. Yes, ma'am, I do. Then you're the LA team leader. We'll get you operational support, but the tactical decisions will be yours. Aldridge looked at Thornton. Colonel, I'm assuming you'll be providing overwatch and strategic coordination? With respect, General, I'm going to Dallas. Thornton's voice was quiet but absolute. According to Sienna's intelligence, Blackwood will be personally overseeing the Dallas operation. It's the keystone of the whole plan. If we can capture him before the attacks begin, we might be able to shut down the entire operation. Capture? Not kill? Aldridge raised an eyebrow. He's more valuable alive, at least initially. We need him to deactivate whatever fail-safes he's put in place. Thornton glanced at Sienna. But make no mistake, General. If it comes down to Richard Blackwood's life or American lives, I won't hesitate. They finalized the operational details over the next 30 minutes. Sullivan would handle New York, coordinating with trusted NYPD and FBI contacts to intercept the attack on Grand Central Station. Donnelly would fortify the Dallas power grid facility and prepare for Blackwood's arrival, and Sienna would take a hastily assembled team to Los Angeles to prevent the attack on LAX's fuel depot. As they prepared to disperse, Aldridge pulled Sienna aside. "I need you to understand something, Lieutenant. The men you'll be commanding in LA, they're good soldiers, but they're also human. They're going to see a 27-year-old woman and make assumptions. You're going to have to prove yourself, probably in ways that aren't fair, definitely in ways that wouldn't be required of a male officer of the same age and rank." "I'm used to it, ma'am," Sienna replied. "I've been proving myself since I was 17 and decided to join the Marines. Every test, every qualification, every deployment, I've had to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. It's exhausting, but it's made me better." "Good, because I'm betting the future of this country on your ability to lead that team, and I don't make bets I expect to lose." Aldridge's expression softened slightly. "Your father was my friend, Lieutenant Hayes, one of the best men I ever served with. I couldn't save him, but I can honor his memory by trusting his daughter to finish what he started." The flight to Los Angeles was arranged through military channels that Aldridge controlled, a cargo transport that drew no attention and left no obvious paper trail. Sienna spent the flight reviewing personnel files for the 4 operators she would be commanding. All men, all with combat experience, all with service records that showed competence and dedication. But as she studied their photos, she wondered how they would react to taking orders from someone they would inevitably see as too young, too inexperienced, too female. They landed at a military airfield outside Los Angeles at 0400 hours on Friday morning, 36 hours before Operation Liberty's end would go active. Sienna was met by a lieutenant colonel who briefed her on the tactical situation while driving her to the staging area. "Your team is assembled and waiting, ma'am," he said, his tone professional but carrying an undercurrent of skepticism. "They were told this is a classified counterterrorism exercise. They don't know the full operational picture." "That's about to change," Sienna replied, watching the LA skyline appear in the pre-dawn darkness. The staging area was a converted warehouse in an industrial district, chosen for its proximity to LAX and its low profile. Inside, 4 men in tactical gear stood around a planning table, and their conversation stopped abruptly when Sienna entered. She could feel their assessment, see the quick exchange of glances that said everything about their expectations. The man who stepped forward was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had seen real combat. "Sergeant Dylan Knox, ma'am. These are Corporals Martinez, Jefferson, and Harper." He paused slightly on the last name, though there was no relation to Sienna. "Lieutenant Sienna Hayes," she said clearly, establishing command presence through tone and posture. "I need you all to understand that this is not an exercise. This is an active operation against a domestic terror threat that will unfold in approximately 36 hours. People will die if we fail. The mission parameters are real, the threat is real, and the stakes are as high as they get." She moved to the planning table and spread out satellite imagery of LAX, specifically the fuel depot that was the target. "At approximately 23:47 hours tomorrow night, a team of at least 4 operatives will attempt to detonate explosives at this location. The blast would ignite jet fuel reserves and create a fireball visible from space. Casualty estimates range from hundreds to thousands, depending on wind conditions and how fast the fire spreads." Knox studied the imagery with a professional eye. "Who's behind it, foreign or domestic?" "Domestic, a shadow organization that has infiltrated our government and military. They're staging this attack to create the justification for martial law and a fundamental change in how this country operates." Sienna met each man's eyes in turn. "You're being asked to take action against what will appear to be fellow Americans, possibly even fellow service members. That's not a decision I'm making lightly, and it's not one I expect you to accept on faith alone." She pulled out her tablet and began displaying evidence. Not everything, not the full conspiracy that would take hours to explain, but enough to show that this wasn't paranoia or political vendetta. Financial records linking the planned attack to high-level officials. Intercepted communications discussing casualty figures with cold calculations. Satellite imagery of the attack team conducting reconnaissance on the target location. The four operators watched in silence, and Sienna could see their skepticism transforming into grim understanding. These were professional soldiers who had seen enough of the world's darkness to recognize real evil when it was laid out in front of them. Jesus Christ, Martinez muttered. This is real. This is actually happening. Who else knows about this? Jefferson asked. Very few people. General Aldridge is coordinating the overall operation. We have teams in New York and Dallas handling simultaneous attacks. We're operating outside official channels because we don't know how deep the corruption goes. Sienna straightened and her voice carried absolute conviction. I know this is asking a lot. I know you have questions, doubts, probably concerns about following someone you just met into an operation that sounds like a conspiracy theory. But I need you to trust me just for the next 36 hours. After that, when this is over, you can demand answers, explanations, whatever you need. Right now, I need soldiers who can follow orders and adapt to changing circumstances. Can you do that? Knox was the first to nod, and Sienna saw respect dawning in his expression. Yes, ma'am, we're with you. The next 30 hours were a blur of preparation and reconnaissance. Sienna led her team through surveillance of the target location, identifying entry points and defensive positions. She drilled them on rules of engagement, emphasizing the need to minimize casualties while still neutralizing the threat. And slowly, through her tactical competence and clear decision-making, she earned their trust. But Knox remained skeptical in subtle ways, questioning her calls and suggesting alternatives that felt more like tests than genuine tactical input. Finally, on Friday evening, he confronted her directly in a side room away from the others. With respect, Lieutenant, you're asking us to go into combat against American targets based on evidence that, frankly, could be fabricated. I've seen enough black ops to know that sometimes the people running them aren't the good guys. How do we know you're not the conspiracy? Sienna had been expecting this, had prepared for it, but the directness still stung. You don't know, Sergeant. Not for certain, but I can give you two pieces of information that might help you decide. First, General Patricia Aldridge personally authorized this operation. If you don't trust me, trust her record and her reputation. And second, my father was Victor Hayes, killed in Moscow in 2005 while investigating this same conspiracy. I've spent 6 months living in hiding, gathering evidence, staying one step ahead of people who want me dead. I don't expect you to understand what that's like, but I need you to understand that this isn't theoretical for me. This is personal. This is my father's legacy, and I will not let his death be for nothing. Knox studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. I read about Victor Hayes, classified after-action reports from operations that officially never happened. He was a legend, one of the best. He was also my dad, taught me to shoot when I was 6, taught me to think tactically before I could ride a bike. And he taught me that sometimes the hardest thing a soldier has to do is stand up to their own government when that government has been corrupted by people who put power above principle. Sienna met Knox's eyes steadily. Tomorrow night, you're going to have to make a choice about who you trust and what you believe. I can't make that choice for you. All I can do is tell you that everything I've shown you is real, and if we don't act, people will die. Knox nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am, and for what it's worth, I'm in, all the way. Friday night blended into Saturday morning, and the clock continued its merciless countdown. Sienna checked in with Thornton via encrypted channel and learned that he had successfully reached Dallas and linked up with Captain Donnelly. Sullivan reported that the New York team was in position and had confirmed hostile activity near Grand Central Station. Everything was proceeding according to plan, which made Sienna nervous because operations never went according to plan. At 1600 hours on Saturday, Aldridge contacted all three team leaders for a final coordination check. Her voice was tense but controlled, the sound of a commander who knew that lives depended on decisions made in the next few hours. All teams be advised. Intelligence indicates Blackwood departed D.C. 3 hours ago aboard a private military transport. Destination confirmed as Dallas. He's going to be on site for the power grid attack, which means he's either supremely confident or planning something we haven't anticipated. Or both, Thornton's voice came through the channel. I'm moving my position to intercept. If I can grab him before the attacks begin, we might be able to shut this down without firing a shot. Negative, Colonel, Aldridge ordered. You are not authorized to engage Blackwood alone. Wait for backup, establish containment, and we'll coordinate the arrest through proper channels. There was a long pause before Thornton responded, and Sienna knew what was coming. With respect, General, proper channels are how we got into this mess. If Blackwood activates a dead man's switch or has contingencies we don't know about, waiting could be fatal. I'm going to do what needs to be done. The channel went silent, and Sienna felt fear clutch at her chest. Thornton was about to do something reckless, something heroic, something that might get him killed, and there was nothing she could do to stop him from 600 miles away. As the sun set over Los Angeles and the final countdown began, Lieutenant Sienna Hayes gathered her team and gave them the briefing that would determine whether they succeeded or failed, lived or died. The faces looking back at her were grim but determined, soldiers who had decided to trust her judgment, even though every instinct probably told them this was insane. We move in at 2300 hours, she said, pointing to the tactical map. Stealth approach, establish overwatch positions here and here. The enemy will likely arrive between 2330 and 2345, which gives us a window to identify, assess, and engage. Rules of engagement are weapons-free on anyone attempting to access the fuel depot with explosive devices, but we need at least one prisoner for interrogation. Questions? Knox raised his hand. What if they have hostages? Then we adapt. My priority is saving innocent lives, even if it means letting the bad guys escape. We can chase terrorists, but we can't bring back the dead. Sienna looked at each of them in turn. I know I'm asking you to trust a lieutenant you met 36 hours ago. I know this goes against training and protocol, and probably every instinct you have, but I'm asking anyway. Trust me tonight, help me stop this attack, and I promise you'll understand why when it's over. The final hours before the operation felt like a lifetime compressed into minutes. Sienna checked and rechecked her gear. The M110 sniper rifle that felt like an extension of her body after thousands of hours of training. She reviewed the tactical plan, looking for flaws and weaknesses, trying to anticipate everything that could go wrong. And she thought about her father, wondered if he had felt this same mixture of fear and determination on that final night in Moscow. At 2200 hours, they moved out into the Los Angeles night, 4 operators and 1 lieutenant carrying the weight of a nation's future on their shoulders. The game was in motion, the pieces were placed, and in less than 2 hours, everything would be decided. Sienna took her position on a rooftop 400 meters from the fuel depot, her rifle trained on the approaches, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Through her scope, she could see Knox and the others moving into position, shadows among shadows, ready to become the last line of defense between America and the chaos that threatened to consume it. The clock on Sienna's tactical display read 2300 hours exactly when the first hostile vehicle appeared on her thermal scope. A white panel van, unremarkable and anonymous. The kind of vehicle that moved through urban environments without drawing attention. It rolled slowly past the LAX fuel depot perimeter, conducting what was clearly a final reconnaissance pass before the attack began. Through her rifle scope, Sienna tracked the van's movement, her breathing controlled and steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 400 meters away, Knox and his team were invisible in the shadows, positioned at strategic points around the depot. In New York, Colonel Sullivan was watching his own targets approach Grand Central Station. In Dallas, Thornton was moving into position to intercept Admiral Blackwood. And in less than 47 minutes, if they failed, thousands of innocent Americans would die to fuel a conspiracy that had been brewing for over a decade. "Eyes on primary target vehicle," Sienna whispered into her radio. "White panel van, conducting surveillance pass. Stand by for additional contacts." Knox's voice came back instantly. "Copy that. We've got movement on the south perimeter. 2 individuals on foot, dressed as maintenance workers. They're carrying toolboxes that are way too heavy for tools." Sienna shifted her scope and found the 2 men Knox had identified. Even through the thermal imaging, she could see the professional way they moved, the constant scanning of their environment, the tactical awareness that marked them as trained operators rather than simple terrorists. These weren't fanatics with improvised explosives. These were soldiers, possibly former military, executing a precision operation. "Martinez, Jefferson, you have those 2 on the south side?" Sienna asked. "Affirmative. We can intercept on your command." "Negative. Hold position. We need to identify all hostiles before we engage. If we move too early, anyone we miss gets a way to activate contingency plans." Sienna's mind was racing through scenarios, calculating risks and probabilities. Her father had taught her that the hardest part of command wasn't making decisions. It was living with the consequences. "All units, weapons tight until we have a complete picture." The next 15 minutes were an agony of controlled tension as more pieces moved into position. The white van returned and parked in a loading zone near the depot's main gate. 3 more individuals appeared from different directions, all dressed to blend in, all moving with purpose toward the target. Sienna counted 7 hostiles total, more than intelligence had suggested, which meant the Prometheus group had committed additional resources to ensure success. At 23:25 hours, her encrypted radio crackled with Sullivan's voice from New York. "LA team, be advised. We have confirmed explosive devices at Grand Central. Multiple packages, sophisticated timers, dead man switches on at least 2 units. This is bigger than we thought." "Can you neutralize?" Sienna asked, keeping her voice steady even as her heart rate spiked. "Working on it, but if they've got the same setup at your location, you're looking at a complex disarm scenario. You might not be able to just shoot your way out of this." Sienna processed that information with growing dread. She had trained for direct action, for precision engagement at range, for the kind of tactical problems that could be solved with superior marksmanship and good positioning. But bomb disposal was a specialized skill set, and while she had basic knowledge, she was far from an expert. "Copy that, New York. We'll adapt as needed." She switched channels. "Knox, did you catch that?" "Yeah, Jefferson has some EOD training from his time in Afghanistan. Not certified, but he's talked down more than a few IEDs." Knox's voice was grim. "If it comes to that, he's our best option." Before Sienna could respond, a new voice crackled through the radio, and her blood turned to ice. It was Thornton, and his transmission was broken by static and the sound of suppressed gunfire. "All teams, Blackwood is on site in Dallas. I'm moving to intercept, but he's got security. At least 6 operators, professional grade. Donnelly's team is engaging, but they're outnumbered." There was a pause filled with more gunfire. Then Thornton's voice came back strained. "Sienna, listen to me. If this goes bad, if Blackwood activates whatever failsafe he's got built into this operation, you need to know something." "Garrett, what are you doing? Fall back and wait for support." "Can't do that. He's preparing to leave, and if he gets away, we lose our chance. But you need to know, there's more to this than just the 3 attacks. Blackwood built in contingencies, redundancies. Even if we stop Liberty's End, he's got something else planned. Something worse." Sienna wanted to scream at him to retreat, to stay safe, to not throw his life away on a heroic gesture that might accomplish nothing. But she was 600 miles away, focused on her own impossible mission, and all she could do was trust that the man who had raised her knew what he was doing. What kind of contingency? She forced herself to ask. Thornton's response was nearly lost in a burst of static and the distinctive crack of rifle fire. Dirty bomb. Somewhere in D.C., if his heart stops, if he dies, it activates automatically. 10-minute countdown. We have to take him alive, Sienna. Have to make him deactivated. That's the only way. The implications hit Sienna like a physical blow. Blackwood had turned himself into a dead man's switch, ensuring that killing him would result in a radiological disaster in the nation's capital. It was brilliant in its cruelty, a final insurance policy that meant he couldn't simply be eliminated. How do you know this? Sienna demanded. Because he just told his security team. I'm close enough to hear their comms, and Blackwood wanted them to know that if they die protecting him, they're not dying for nothing. He's using the threat of the dirty bomb to ensure loyalty. Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. I have to go. Stay focused on your mission. Stop the LA attack. Trust me to handle Dallas. The transmission cut out, leaving Sienna alone with her fear and her duty. For a moment, she was paralyzed, torn between the mission in front of her and the desperate need to help Thornton. Then Knox's voice brought her back to the present. Lieutenant, we've got movement. All 7 hostiles are converging on the depot entrance. They're about to make their play. Sienna forced herself to focus, to compartmentalize the way Thornton had taught her. One mission at a time, one decision at a time. Save the people you can reach. Trust others to save the people you can't. All units prepare to engage on my mark. Knox, you and Martinez take the 2 on the south approach. Jefferson, you're with me for overwatch and potential EOD work. Harper, cover R6 and watch for reinforcements. She took a deep breath, her finger moving to the trigger of her rifle. Remember, we need at least 1 prisoner. Aim for leg shots if possible. Kill shots only if necessary. Through her scope, she watched the 7 hostiles gather at the depot gate. One of them produced what looked like an electronic keycard, probably stolen or forged, and swiped it through the access reader. The gate began to slide open, and the team moved forward with practiced efficiency. That was when Sienna saw the 8th person, a child, a little girl maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing pajamas and looking terrified. One of the hostiles had her by the arm, dragging her along as a human shield. Sienna's mind reeled, trying to understand why terrorists would bring a child to an attack site, until the horrible logic became clear. Insurance. If the operation was interrupted, if security or police responded, the child would be leverage. A guarantee of escape or a final atrocity if escape became impossible. All units, hold fire, Sienna commanded, her voice tight with controlled rage. They have a hostage, child, approximately 8 years old. We cannot engage with the child in the line of fire. Knox's response was immediate and professional, despite the tension in his voice. Copy that. What's the play, Lieutenant? Sienna's mind raced through scenarios, tactical options, each one worse than the last. A precision shot to take out the hostile holding the child was possible, but at 400 meters in low light with a moving target, the margin for error was microscopic. If she missed, if her bullet struck the child instead, she would have to live with that forever. But if she did nothing, if she let them proceed with the attack, the resulting explosion would kill hundreds, possibly thousands. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, lessons taught when she was barely old enough to understand them. When the choice is between certain death for many or possible death for few, you choose possible. You take the risk. You make the hard call. That's what it means to be a soldier. Jefferson, Martinez, can you get close enough for a takedown without being spotted? Sienna asked. Negative, Martinez responded. They're scanning constantly, professional security protocols. We move, they see us. Through her scope, Sienna watched the terrorists move deeper into the depot, heading toward the massive fuel tanks that represented their target. The child was crying now, struggling weakly against her captor's grip, and Sienna realized with cold certainty that there was only one option that gave them a chance to save everyone. Knox, when I take the shot, you and your team rush the position. Fast and hard, overwhelming force. They'll be disoriented, focused on the threat from range. That's your window. What shot, Lieutenant? You can't risk hitting the kid. I'm not aiming for the kid. Sienna adjusted her scope, calculating wind speed and bullet drop, factoring in every variable she had trained for over thousands of hours on the range. I'm aiming for the hostile holding her, but it's a ricochet shot off the metal fuel tank behind them. Bullet will fragment and hit him from the side while missing the child entirely. There was a long pause before Knox responded. Lieutenant, that's a 1 in a million shot. If you miss by even an inch, either the bullet hits the kid or it punctures the fuel tank and we all die in the explosion. Then I won't miss. Sienna's voice was steel. My father made a shot like this in Mogadishu in 1993, saved 6 hostages with a bullet that traveled through 3 walls before finding its target. He taught me the math, the physics, the way metal changes a bullet's trajectory. I can make this shot. She didn't wait for approval or argument. Command meant making decisions others couldn't or wouldn't make, accepting responsibility for outcomes, good and bad. Sienna steadied her breathing, let her heart rate slow, felt the familiar calm that came over her in the moment before the trigger pull. The world narrowed to the scope, to the target, to the precise angle of incidence where her bullet would strike the fuel tank and ricochet into her target's torso, while the child stood just inches away. She factored in the tank's curvature, the bullet's velocity, the way copper jacket would fragment on impact. Every variable, every calculation, every lesson her father and Thornton had drilled into her over years of training. On 3, she whispered. 1, 2, 3. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the suppressed shot barely louder than a cough. Through the scope, she watched the bullet travel across 400 meters of open space, strike the fuel tank at exactly the angle she had calculated, and fragment into pieces that tore through her target's chest and shoulder. The hostile dropped instantly, his grip on the child releasing as he fell. The child stood frozen for a heartbeat, then began to run. Go, 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 Sienna shouted, and Knox's team erupted from concealment like avenging angels. The remaining 6 terrorists spun toward the new threat, weapons coming up, but they were caught in the worst possible tactical position. Half their attention on the child, half on the incoming assault, fully committed to neither response. Sienna worked her rifle with mechanical precision, putting rounds downrange to suppress and distract. She aimed for legs and arms, disabling shots rather than killing blows, because they needed prisoners, and because some part of her still believed these men might be soldiers following orders, rather than true believers in the Prometheus conspiracy. Knox reached the child first, scooping her up and diving behind cover as bullets cracked through the air above them. Martinez and Jefferson engaged from opposite angles, creating a crossfire that left the terrorists with nowhere to hide. Within 30 seconds, 3 hostiles were down with leg wounds. 2 more were dead from center mass shots when they tried to detonate explosives. And the final terrorist had his hands up in surrender. Target area secure, Knox reported, his voice shaking with adrenaline. Jesus Christ, Lieutenant, that shot. That impossible, insane shot. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? My father, Sienna replied simply, already scanning for additional threats. Jefferson, check those explosives. Make sure nothing is on a timer we can't stop. Martinez, secure the prisoners. Knox, get that child somewhere safe and find out where she came from. As her team moved to execute orders, Sienna finally allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. The ricochet shot had been the most difficult thing she had ever attempted, and the fact that it had worked felt less like skill and more like divine intervention. But there was no time to celebrate because her radio was crackling with updates from New York and Dallas, and neither one was good news. LA team, this is New York. Sullivan's voice was tight with stress. We've neutralized the Grand Central attack, but one hostile escaped with a remote detonator. He's in the tunnel somewhere, and if he triggers it, this whole section of Manhattan goes up. We're searching, but it's a maze down here. Copy that, New York. Keep searching. Sienna switched channels. Dallas team, status report. The response was Donnelly, not Thornton, and his voice carried the sound of nearby combat. We've engaged Blackwood's security force. 3 hostiles down, but Blackwood himself has barricaded inside his command vehicle. It's armored, and we can't breach without heavy weapons. Colonel Thornton is attempting to negotiate, but Blackwood isn't responding. Where is Thornton now? He's inside the perimeter, about 50 meters from Blackwood's position. Ma'am, he's planning something. I can see it in how he's moving. He's going to do something crazy, and I don't think he's planning to survive it. Sienna felt her world tilt. Thornton had raised her, trained her, been the only father figure she had known since Victor's death. The idea of losing him was unbearable, but she was still 600 miles away, still bound to her own mission, still unable to help the person she loved most in the world. Patch me through to him, she ordered. Direct channel, encrypted. There was a moment of static, then Thornton's voice came through, rough and tired. Sienna, you stopped the LA attack? The depot is secure, hostiles neutralized, 1 child hostage rescued. Garrett, what are you planning? Donnelly says you're about to do something stupid. Not stupid, necessary. She could hear him moving, boots on concrete, the sound of his breathing labored. Blackwood has turned himself into a dead man's switch, heart rate monitor tied to the dirty bomb in D.C. If he dies, the bomb goes off. But I've been listening to his communications, and I think I've figured out a way around it. What way? The bomb isn't keyed to his death specifically, it's keyed to his heart stopping. But there's a 10-minute window before detonation, time for medical personnel to resuscitate him if something goes wrong accidentally. That's the flaw in his system, Sienna. That's the opening we need. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. You're going to kill him and then revive him before the bomb goes off. Garrett, that's insane. You don't have medical training for field resuscitation, and even if you did, 10 minutes isn't enough time. It's enough if someone disables the bomb in D.C. while I'm keeping Blackwood alive. General Aldridge has teams standing by, but they can't move until Blackwood gives up the location. So I'm going to kill him, let him think he's won, and then bring him back and make him tell us where it is. Thornton's voice was calm, resigned, the sound of a man who had made peace with his decision. But there's a complication. What complication? I need someone to take the shot, someone good enough to shoot me in Blackwood with a single bullet, someone who can put a round through my shoulder and into his heart from distance, through cover, with absolute precision. He paused and Sienna could hear the emotion in his voice. I need you to do what I couldn't do in Moscow 19 years ago. I need you to take the shot that saves everyone. Sienna's hands were shaking, her entire body rejecting what he was asking. No, absolutely not. I'm not shooting you, Garrett. There has to be another way. There isn't. I've run every scenario, every option. This is the only play that gets us everything we need. Blackwood dead, the bomb location revealed, and time to stop it before detonation. His voice softened. I trained you for this, Sienna. Every impossible shot, every calculation under pressure, every moment of doubt you had to overcome. It was all leading to this. You can make this shot. I know you can. I can't. Her voice broke. You're my father in every way that matters. I can't be the one who kills you. You won't be killing me. You'll be saving thousands of lives in D.C., saving this country from a coup, and finishing what your real father started 19 years ago. She could hear him moving again, getting into position. I'm going into Blackwood's command vehicle now. I'm going to force him to position himself so you have a clear shot through the vehicle's window. When you see the target alignment, when you see me and Blackwood lined up, you take the shot. Don't hesitate, don't second guess. Just trust your training and pull the trigger. Garrett, please. I love you, Sienna. Tell your father I'm sorry it took me 19 years to finish the job. The transmission ended, and Sienna was left staring at her rifle, tears blurring her vision, her entire world collapsing down to an impossible choice. Knox appeared beside her, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Lieutenant, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. There is no other way. Sienna wiped her eyes roughly and checked her rifle, muscle memory taking over even as her heart shattered. Jefferson, can you fly a helicopter? I'm qualified on several models, ma'am. Why? Because after I take this shot, I need to get to Dallas as fast as humanly possible. Find us, transport, military or civilian, I don't care. Commandeer it if you have to. She was already calculating distances, flight times, the razor-thin margin between possible and impossible. Knox, you're in command here. Secure the site, hand off the prisoners to federal custody through General Aldridge's channels, and make sure that child gets back to her family.
What are you going to do, Lieutenant?
I'm going to shoot the man who raised me, fly 600 miles in less than an hour, and then try to keep him alive long enough to save Washington, D.C. from a nuclear dirty bomb. She checked her watch. 23:42 hours. 5 minutes until Operation Liberty's end reached its climax. And if I fail, if I miss the shot or the timing is wrong, or Blackwood doesn't break, then we all die knowing we gave everything we had. The helicopter Jefferson found was a civilian medical transport, fast and maneuverable, based at a nearby hospital. Sienna didn't ask how he arranged for it to be available, with a full tank of fuel and no questions asked. She simply climbed aboard with her rifle, gave Jefferson the coordinates for Dallas, and prepared herself for what came next. Through her scope, via a satellite feed that General Aldridge had patched through to her tactical display, she watched Thornton breach Blackwood's armored command vehicle. She saw the Admiral spin in surprise, saw his security team raise weapons, saw Thornton move with the speed and precision of a man half his age. Bodies dropped, bullets flew, and within 15 seconds Thornton had Blackwood at gunpoint while the rest of his security lay dead or dying. Sienna's helicopter was climbing now, racing east toward Dallas. But she kept her rifle trained on the satellite feed. Her entire world narrowed down to the two men in that command vehicle. Thornton was talking, she could see his mouth moving, and Blackwood was responding with what looked like defiance and contempt. Then Thornton did something that made Sienna's blood turn cold. He holstered his weapon, walked directly up to Blackwood, and grabbed him in what looked like an embrace. He was positioning them, she realized, lining up their bodies so that a bullet could pass through one and into the other, creating the shot he needed her to take. Through the satellite feed, she saw Thornton look directly at the camera, directly at her, and mouth 3 words. I trust you. The distance was 847 meters. The wind was gusting at 15 miles per hour from the southwest. The bullet would have to pass through Thornton's right shoulder, missing bone and major arteries by centimeters, before continuing into Blackwood's chest to hit his heart. And she had to make this shot from a moving helicopter while looking at a satellite feed rather than direct visual contact. It was impossible. She made the shot anyway. The bullet, get us to Dallas now, Sienna ordered Jefferson, her voice somehow steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Maximum speed, and I don't care if you have to violate every FAA regulation ever written. The helicopter tilted forward and accelerated, racing across the night sky while below them, America held its breath. Through her radio, she could hear General Aldridge coordinating with teams in D.C., could hear Sullivan reporting that the New York attack had been completely neutralized, could hear Donnelly confirming that both Thornton and Blackwood were down, but vital signs were present. Time check, Sienna demanded. Blackwood's heart stopped at 23:47 and 32 seconds, Aldridge responded. You have 9 minutes and 28 seconds before the dirty bomb activates. The bomb disposal team is standing by, but we need the location. We need Blackwood conscious and talking. The flight to Dallas took 43 minutes that felt like 43 hours. Sienna sat in the helicopter's cargo area, her rifle across her lap, her hands covered in the blood from Thornton's shoulder that somehow covered her, despite 600 miles of separation. The bullet did exactly what it was supposed to do, but he's lost a lot of blood. Our medic has him stabilized, but he needs a hospital. Donnelly pointed toward the command vehicle. Blackwood regained consciousness 2 minutes ago. We've been trying to get the bomb location, but he's not talking. Says he'd rather die knowing he took DC with him. Sienna ran toward the command vehicle, her boots pounding against concrete, her heart racing with fear and desperation. Inside, she found Thornton on a stretcher, his shoulder wrapped in bloody bandages, his face pale but his eyes open and aware. Standing over him with armed guards was Admiral Richard Blackwood, conscious but restrained, his chest also bandaged where her bullet had struck his heart. The Admiral looked up when Sienna entered, and recognition flickered in his eyes. Victor Hayes' daughter, I should have known you'd survive. The capital of the United States is about to become an irradiated wasteland, and I'll die knowing I accomplished something your father couldn't prevent. Blackwood's smile was cold and certain. Kill me, save me, torture me, it doesn't matter. That bomb is going off, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Sienna looked down at Thornton, saw the pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with his physical wounds. The strongest walls break not from force, but from finding the crack in the foundation. She turned to Blackwood, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. You know what my father discovered in Moscow? What he died trying to expose? He found proof that you were selling secrets to foreign governments, not for money or ideology, but because you were building your own private army, your own nation within a nation. The Prometheus Group wasn't about taking over America. It was about creating something new, something that would survive even if America fell. Blackwood's expression flickered, just for a moment, and Sienna knew she had found the crack. The dirty bomb, it's not in a government building or a monument. It's not designed for maximum casualties or symbolic impact. It's positioned to destroy records, isn't it? Files that would expose the full scope of Prometheus, reveal every member, show exactly how deep your network goes. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You're not trying to kill Americans, you're trying to kill evidence, which means the bomb is in a records facility, federal archives, intelligence agency databases, somewhere that holds the proof you need destroyed. The Admiral's jaw tightened, and Sienna knew she was right. She grabbed her radio, already calculating locations. General Aldridge, the bomb is in a federal records facility in D.C. Somewhere, it's technically D.C. metro area, houses classified records that are rarely accessed. And it's isolated enough that a dirty bomb there would minimize immediate casualties while spreading contamination across miles of data storage. I'm dispatching teams now. Sienna looked at her watch. 2 minutes and 40 seconds remaining. She turned to Blackwood, who was staring at her with something between hatred and respect. How do we disarm it? She asked. What's the code? There is no disarm code. Thornton, I need you to map Admiral Blackwood's cardiac rhythm. Every detail, every variation, everything that makes his heartbeat unique. Can you do that? With the right equipment, yes, ma'am. But I'd need maybe 10 minutes to get a complete map, and you're saying we have less than 3. Then map what you can and extrapolate the rest. General Aldridge, do you have someone at the bomb site who can input cardiac data into a detonation system? We have EOD specialists standing by, but they're saying the bomb's triggering mechanism is sophisticated. They'll need time to integrate any bypass system. Aldridge's voice was tight with stress. Sienna, we're running out of options here. Sienna looked at Blackwood, at Thornton, at the faces of the soldiers around her who had trusted her judgment and followed her into an impossible mission. She thought about her father dying in Moscow, about Thornton taking a bullet through his shoulder, about all the lives that depended on decisions made in the next 90 seconds. Then we don't bypass the system, we trick it. She turned to Jefferson. Get me the cardiac pattern, anything you can map in the next 60 seconds. General, have your EOD team prepare to input data, but tell them they're not disarming the bomb. They're convincing it that Admiral Blackwood is still alive after his heart actually stops. Understanding dawned in Thornton's eyes, and he squeezed her hand one more time before letting go. Do it, he whispered. Save them all. The next 90 seconds were the longest of Sienna's life. Jefferson worked frantically with medical equipment, mapping Blackwood's heartbeat with increasing precision. General Aldridge coordinated with the EOD team at the archives, their voices tense as they prepared to input data into a system they barely understood. And Sienna stood between her dying mentor and the traitor who had killed her father, knowing that success or failure would be measured in fractions of a second. Cardiac pattern mapped and transmitted, Jefferson announced at the 30-second mark. It's not complete, but it's the best I can do in this time frame. EOD team acknowledging receipt of data, Aldridge reported. They're integrating it into the triggering mechanism now. This is either going to work perfectly or blow up in their faces. Literally. Blackwood was laughing now, a sound edged with hysteria and certainty. You can't fake my heartbeat precisely enough. The system will detect even micro variations and detonate anyway. You're all going to die knowing you failed. Sienna ignored him, focused entirely on the countdown in her head. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Pattern integration complete, Aldridge announced. The bomb thinks it's still receiving Blackwood's vital signs. If we're lucky, we just bought ourselves time to actually disarm this thing. 7. 6. 5. Admiral Blackwood, Sienna said quietly, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit terrorism, and the murder of Victor Hayes, along with dozens of other American patriots. You're going to spend whatever remains of your life in a cell, knowing that everything you built, everything you planned, failed because you underestimated the daughter of the man you killed. 4. 3. 2. General, what's the status of the bomb? Sienna asked, her voice remarkably steady. 1. 0. Bomb is stable, Aldridge reported, and Sienna could hear the relief flooding through her voice. The cardiac pattern is holding. EOD has time to work. You did it, Lieutenant Hayes. You saved Washington, D.C. The command vehicle erupted in controlled chaos as medics rushed to stabilize Thornton for transport. As Blackwood was secured and prepared for federal custody, as reports flooded in from New York and Los Angeles, confirming that all 3 attacks of Operation Liberty's End had been completely neutralized. Sienna stood in the center of it all, feeling simultaneously numb and overwhelmed, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 72 hours. Thornton reached out and grabbed her hand one more time before the medics took him to the helicopter. Your father would be so proud, he whispered. I'm so proud. You did what we couldn't. You finished the mission. You're going to be fine, Sienna said, squeezing his hand hard enough to hurt. You're going to recover, and then you're going to spend the next 20 years boring me with stories about the good old days and how much tougher things were when you were young. Damn right I am. His smile was weak, but genuine. Someone has to keep you humble when they start giving you medals for this. They took him away then, loading him into the medical helicopter that would rush him to the nearest trauma center. Sienna watched it lift off into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying the man who had been her father in every way that mattered, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to cry. Then she wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and turned back to the mission that still needed finishing. The next 3 months were a blur of debriefings, testimony, and watching the Prometheus Group conspiracy unravel in spectacular fashion. 67 arrests across government, military, and private sector. Congressional hearings that dominated news cycles for weeks. Reforms and oversight measures designed to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. Admiral Richard Blackwood was convicted of treason and sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. In his trial, prosecutors detailed a conspiracy that had been active for over 15 years, reaching into the highest levels of American power. The evidence that Sienna and her father had gathered became the foundation for the case that would reshape how America thought about domestic security threats. Thornton recovered slowly from his shoulder wound, the bullet having missed major arteries but done significant damage to muscle and tissue. He spent 6 weeks in physical therapy and another 3 months adjusting to reduced range of motion in his right arm. When Sienna visited him in the hospital, he joked that getting shot by his own daughter was a hell of a way to retire from field operations. "You're the best sniper I ever trained," he said during one visit. "Better than Victor, better than me, better than anyone I've ever seen. That shot in Dallas threw my shoulder into Blackwood's heart from a moving helicopter via satellite feed. They're going to be teaching that in tactical schools for the next 50 years. "I had a good teacher," Sienna replied, adjusting his pillow and trying not to think about how close she had come to missing, to killing him instead of saving everyone. The official commendations came 3 months after Operation Liberty's end. Thornton received the Medal of Honor for his sacrifice, though he tried to refuse it until General Aldridge personally ordered him to accept. Colonel Sullivan and Captain Donnelly received Distinguished Service Crosses for their roles in stopping the attacks, and Sienna found herself promoted to captain and offered a position training the next generation of snipers at Fort Benning. But the ceremony that mattered most to her was smaller, quieter, held at Arlington National Cemetery on a cold morning in late spring. Victor Hayes had been buried there 19 years earlier under a simple headstone that listed him as killed in action. Now, with the full truth of his sacrifice revealed, they placed a new marker, one that honored him as a hero who had died fighting domestic enemies of the Constitution. Sienna stood before her father's grave with Thornton beside her, both of them in dress uniforms, both of them carrying the weight of missions completed and prices paid. General Aldridge was there too, along with a handful of people who knew the full story of Operation Nightfall and what it had cost. "He would have been so proud of you," Aldridge said quietly. "Everything you accomplished, everything you risked, you finished what he started, and you did it with the same courage and dedication that made him a legend." "I had help," Sienna replied, glancing at Thornton. "From the man who kept his promise to a dying brother, who raised me and trained me and taught me what it means to serve something bigger than yourself." They stood in silence for a while, paying respects to a man whose sacrifice had taken 19 years to truly honor. Then Sienna pulled something from her pocket, a small flash drive that contained every piece of evidence she had gathered, every connection she had traced, every truth she had uncovered about the Prometheus Group and its conspiracy. "I'm leaving this here," she said, placing it at the base of the headstone. "Everything you died for, Dad, every secret you tried to expose, it's finished now. You can rest." As they walked away from the grave, Sienna felt Thornton's hand on her shoulder, strong and steady despite the lingering weakness from his wound. "What now?" he asked. "Training post at Benning? Quiet retirement? You've earned the right to step back, Sienna. No one would blame you." "I thought about it," she admitted. "But then I remembered something you said when I was 16. You told me that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and that every generation has to fight to preserve what the previous generation built." "I remember. I was trying to explain why I couldn't stop investigating, couldn't just let your father's death go unavenged." "Well, I can't stop either. The Prometheus Group is finished, but there will be others. There are always others. People who think they know better than democracy, who believe the ends justify any means, who forget that power is supposed to serve the people rather than rule them." Sienna looked back at her father's grave one last time. "So I'm going to keep fighting, keep training soldiers who can face those threats, Keep honoring Dad's memory by finishing every mission he would have taken. Thornton smiled, the kind of proud expression that made Sienna remember being 8 years old and showing him her first perfect score at the shooting range. Victor really would be so damn proud, and so am I. They reached Thornton's car, and Sienna was about to say goodbye when her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. She checked the screen, and her blood went cold. The message was brief, just 2 lines of text from an anonymous sender. Prometheus was just the beginning. Project Phoenix has been activated. Below that, a single file attachment with a name that made her hands shake. Victor Hayes knew too much. She showed the message to Thornton, watched his expression harden into the tactical focus she knew so well. "Looks like retirement will have to wait," he said quietly. "For both of us," Sienna agreed, already mentally preparing for whatever came next. "Ready for one more mission, old man?" Thornton's smile was grim but determined. "Always." They climbed into the car and drove away from Arlington, 2 soldiers heading toward whatever new threat had emerged from the ashes of the old conspiracy. Behind them, Victor Hayes rested in honored ground, his sacrifice finally recognized, his daughter carrying forward the mission that had cost him everything. The war wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But Sienna Hayes had learned from the best, had been forged in fire and loss and impossible choices, and she was ready for whatever came next. Her father had taught her to fight. Garrett Thornton had taught her why fighting mattered, and now she would teach others, would stand as a guardian against the darkness, would be the person her father had believed she could become. The Nightfall Protocol was complete, but for Captain Sienna Hayes, the real mission was just beginning.